So, how's it going? Well, for this, I'm going to be running through the gunsmithing workbench that I've been working on for a little while here. Uh, so, I'll get to it and I'll show you where the original design came from. I was actually inspired by a couple of different games that had their weapon setups the way they did. Like Borderlands had a very cool way that they did their guns. It was simple. They broke down into a lot of different pieces. I definitely like the way that games like Ghost Recon Future Soldier did the weapon smithing system, but this was where my first concept was for the idea of how I could do my menu system. It was alright at the time for my plan of attack, but I wanted a gun to break apart. I thought it was cool, but then I looked back at this again and I was like, there's just too many buttons. It was a little taking up too much room for not enough of functionality of the weapon and the system working together. And this is just a YouTube grab, so I don't have the original build up on here. And from there, I ended up coming back, and I came back from the drawing board again, and then I decided, okay, let's start up from working into the weapon out. So I know I wanted to try to keep a master skeleton of some sort for the primary housing. So the housing is going to be like the brainchild of the entire gun. So if whatever your system is that drives the projectile forward, everything else attaches to it from there, and it does what it needs to do. So I had a couple IK controls, like this down here would be my setup right now for the skeleton of the gun system, or the housing system, but it's subject to change as it says here, because I still have yet to test the animations, which will be the next phase that I'm going to be going into pretty soon. And this was my second idea for how I'm going to set up the button system, or the UMG and interaction for the weapon customization. So instead of having to deal with all like little buttons for each individual thing, that wouldn't really work too well, and it wouldn't translate well over either for when I go to do this on a controller. So what I did was I ended up deciding, let's go ahead and keep it to as few buttons as possible, but at the same time give enough flexibility to allow the player to cycle through and have enough control from just say a D-pad, for instance, and a controller setup. So I wanted to keep everything at a relatively small scale with just these four buttons up here. This would be my main control to be able to cycle through. I'd have some kind of post-process effect driving what part you have selected, and the categories are still going to be coming together pretty soon. I'm just lacking a lot of assets and content right now for being able to switch up categories between rifles, shotguns, full autos, and support weapons and stuff like that. This would show the overall effect of the weapons, such as accuracy, your zoom capabilities, your ammo, and everything else that drives us in, even your firing speed. Your preview button, I wanted to have that be your means of interacting with the weapon to see what your gun looks like that you're assembling. So that's my next task as well. These three here are not going to be coming anytime soon because this is more to deal with gameplay reasons. I don't think I'm going to have it up in the next task build, but it'll be coming along because that's more driven from the player instead of the gun system, and then obviously your X button because you want to get back to gameplay. So from there, I came back to Unreal, and let's go ahead and I'll show you a quick preview of how this works. So when you first start up, you have just a lot of basic controls. The character just kind of moves around. You can shoot this weapon. You can aim. Because I have no sights, he's aiming over the top of the weapon, and you can still fire it. And then if you want to, this is the weapon bench, which needs to be textured and all that nice little look to it. That'll also be part of the next task. And if I come up and I interact with it by pushing E, it'll actually center the character to the front of the bench, and it'll bring up your interaction menu. So what happens here is now we have a highlighted piece. It tells you the component you're working with, the name of that component, and here's the 4-button press system. So you have your component that you can cycle through. Let me go ahead and put a sight on here so I can show a better selection. So as I'm going through previous components, going through next components, and it just cycles through telling you what parts you're going to be switching out. And then to switch out these pieces, all you need to do is go up or down. So now I went into another another housing system. And if you notice too, there's stats that are being driven up here. These are the overall stats effects of your gun system you're using. So for this one here, fire rate's really fast, but its accuracy is not that great. But if I switch it up to something else, accuracy is really higher, but the fire rate's way slower. And again, if I go through my other parts, I can go ahead and switch out my sights, switch the 2 barrels that I have. I wish I could have more. And I have different magazines I can choose to them, different stocks, and that's it for now. Another future tasking I'm going to have is I'm still trying to decide how I want to assemble a menu system or a different working position for adding barrel extension pieces, such as secondary scopes, stabilizers, whatever you want to call it, that actually will modify the stats of these of the weapon variables up here. So once you have that done, I can still go through categories, but I don't have any categories, so it's going back to the rifle category because that's the only one available. The preview button will turn off the post-processing effect that's on here right now, and I want to have it where you can click or move with the thumbstick on your controller to be able to preview your weapon. You push the preview button again, and it'll bring everything back just the way you had it. And if we go ahead and leave the workbench will close up. It'll give us our weapon back, and it'll give us back our player control, and we can come through and we can fire away. And if you notice too that the scope now, if I aim, actually has a sight piece on it, because on the blueprint builds, which I'll pull up right now, if I go to the viewports, this is just a quick preview of it, but it's not what the player starts with. In the attachments primary, it'd be attachments secondary since it's a sights. You can come down to rifle sights, and within a struct, you can assign the name of. I usually put down the name of the housing system that this is associated with, and what sites that housing system can use. When you have the once you have the site that you want, like this one here is not the one you're seeing, but it still has the same. It still has a site picture on it. You can say yes, it uses a texture, and this is my widget that it uses to show that. And you also have an attribute for field of view, so you can increase how close or how far things can be seen from the player's perspective. A lot of the pieces are actually set up just like this, so the barrels are another example of that for their attachments. Stocks can do that, magazines, the housing system is that way too. The housings would be in your primary attachments, so if I come down to rifle housings, and if I go into housings, I have different vectors where you can offset these pieces for different reasons. So sometimes the skeleton might not line up correctly for where your socket piece is for that attachment, so you can actually choose where to move things around. And if I can better show this off by actually attaching something really quickly. Actually, I'll leave it at that. We'll move on from there. And from here, this is the event graph. So from here, it's just finding through each one. At the same time, this also talks to the UMG. So whatever happens to the UMG, there's always a refresh that gets sent, and it goes through to rebuild everything so that the master can be built. So if I go to the actual UMG, this is the actual beginning, or hopefully close to getting there with a functioning UMG for the weapon component build. So this is previous to next for your part selection, so as you go through and select different pieces, it will, instead of talking about it, I'll just show you. Full screen that, bring this over. So now that the UMG is in place, I can actually do a quick preview for it. And as you go through selecting your different pieces, your different component selection, it'll go through and cycle through the different components that you're wanting to use. Now this is a refresh for getting all of the attributes that get sent up here for the overall weapon stats. Okay, from there, that's our UMG rundown. And this would be the primary. Well, this is the child blueprint that came off of the master, so it's a little easier to tell what's going on here. So this would be the weapon that the player would start with, and you can always change everything out by easily just with some sliders. So I only have category 1. I have 2 different housings. You can change out the different barrels, different stocks, and different ammo feeds. The reason I call it ammo feed instead of magazine is because maybe you don't use bullets, maybe you use energies, or you shoot balls, or you shoot teddy bears, who knows what. You can assign the different types of muzzle flashes and projectiles. I got this off the muzzle flash pack that the guy provided. They're really nicely done muzzles. And from here, you just can assign your barrels. So my next set of taskings will be getting these barrel assets working with their attributes to talk to the actual main system. We'll need to get a couple of preview weapon to work as well on the bench, and I'd like to also get a gamepad controller working. But if there's any other suggestions that you guys might have, just let me know, and I'll consider being able to try to put that into working with the bench. Hopefully my future plans are to maybe get this into the marketplace so you guys can actually use it and maybe do your own weapon crafting system for your own liking. So other than that, I'll leave it at that, and I'll see you guys next time on the next build I have for this. So later.